Welcome back to Beyond the Veil background information. Just as a side note, while I'm recording this, my cat Cleo is sort of storming around the place, so you may hear her making a lot of noise. Mastema, the judging angel. Mastema was a curious being himself, the first of his kind and born from the fallen angel Astaroth as her wings broke. His wings had opened up and he had flown back to the edge of heaven, standing there before Michael and fully grown, ready to be punished or accepted. But he was stuck between the realms of heaven and hell, most prominent upon earth, and the highest had given him a job that would become necessary now evil existed within the world. Judgment of souls. Mastema was stern, never smiled, but never lost his temper, and he was a curiously calm creature with angelic looks. Obadias and Mastema had a good relationship. Obadias was the last Mastema born, as his demon mother's last few feathers fell, and as such he was titled brother to Mastema, and able to talk to him more convincingly than most others, and yet he had a feeling he would not need to say anything for Josiah's sake. That's from my dearest love. Where to start? With Mastema the question is often whether it is a benevolent being or malevolent, yet always on the side of God. Whether you read him as the same as an angel of adversity or another being that could be mistaken for a force for evil, this being is certainly curious in not having much of a description in the text, but getting quite a few things linked to them. Firstly, the name Mastema means hostility. They are mentioned in the Book of Jubilees, a piece deemed canonical in the Ethiopian Orthodox and Beta Israel, wherein the being is thought to be in the role of a Satan. This means they effectively were deemed to have a position that was necessarily, although not to the benefit of mankind, but rather to aid in testing their faith. The piece states that when God wished to remove all the demons after the flood, and Noah prays that his descendants would be free from demonic attack, Mastema intervenes. Mastema requests that God gives him command of a tenth of all the demons in order to continue his role to corrupt and lead astray before my judgment, because the evil of the sons of men is great. Jubilees 10:8. Quite a fascinating statement, indeed, and I like the description of it upon the Wikipedia page that says Mastema is the tester of humans with God's permission. But in Jubilees he is also said to send a plague of birds that counsels God to test Abraham, and that he was on the side of the Egyptian priests in testing Moses and the power of God, yet uses this power to kill the firstborn. It's quite a curious group of situations that show this clear demonic character, and yet that all his works are under the instruction or for the benefit of God. This is where you can see similarities with the Christian devil, and yet differences in that the tests of Mastema are not inherently to hurt man. Another way to describe Mastema is as the persecutor of God, who persecutes evil and carries out the punishments of God. With his role in Jubilees, especially with the killing of the firstborn, it's clear to see how that can be interpreted. Of course, different scholars, different books, different religions within the Abrahamic traditions debate which angel has this name or which angel does this task, but Mastema is unique in being engendered by the actions of the Watchers, whereas the Satan are thought to just be. In the Dictionary of Angels by Gustav Davidson, he describes Mastema as the accusing angel, working as God's tempter and executioner and the prince of evil, injustice, condemnation. So there's not really a lot about Mastema in this sense, but I remember when I stumbled upon the name a long while ago on a very basic website listing demon names. This was so long ago it was hosted on an Angel Fire website. I think it must have been about 2008. Anyway, I recalled it stating that Mastema was a judge and arguably half angel and half demon. In hindsight, I realised it probably meant that in the sense of being considered demonic but in the service of God, so it left a different impression upon me than would be expected. Because I used Satan now to do the work of the tempter and tester, I chose for Mastema to have a more interesting role as the judge of souls that could not be determined as going to heaven or hell just yet, and because of the ambiguous idea of demon or angel, making him the judge where I knew there were demon lawyers in hell. I realised that he was probably best to stay as judge, that his ownership of the tenth of demons could mean there were more like him, which I titled the Mastema. Added an extra M to make it plural, because I used to do that sort of thing when I was writing in the beginning, and that these were demon-angel hybrids of the kind, born after or before the flood, with no particular place to go but to aid Mastema, and that they later became the judges yet guardians of the veil beings. So here's my Mastema for you. He's certainly interesting. Name, Mastema. Position, judging angel. Story featured in various, including My Dearest Loathe. Role, neutral party. Gender, although assumed agender, he prefers to be seen as male and given male pronouns. Description, always cloaked in black with invisible wings that can only be noticed when caught in candlelight. His hands are skeletal, pale and thin with long limbs that move quite slowly. An air of grey and dust is often about him, and he is regularly seen with large books that tell the story of each individual. When he comes into the courtroom, his hood always hangs over his face. giving him a look like a monk, and he will sit and remain in silence, though always leering down over others like any judge. Only when he makes his judgment are his horrifying red eyes shown and set into a curiously delicate face like an androgynous teenager. This mix of male and female, as well as young and old, seems to show off his balancing features, but when he removes his robe there are millions of blinking eyes of red all over his body and even on the back of his head. He is often bald too, but for visiting the living, which can be scared by him, he arrives as a youthful little child with golden curls wrapped in a grey robe that laughs gently and beckons them to listen. Realm. The Mastema court, which lies between heaven and hell, but outside of earth. Abilities. Can move between realms, cannot be lied to, knows the life of all beings and their fate, including angels and demons. He knows when the end will come, and he does not interfere with the lives of men very often now, but did before to ensure he knew their path to heaven or hell. He exists without ever experiencing time, and so can step into the past or future, because to him all time is the present. He can control demons that meet him, and is effective in dealing with the likes of Thammuz and Belial. He has the ability to end and extend life, to release demons from hell to do jobs for him like bringers of disease, and he can communicate with anyone. Master, the Almighty. Personality? A little morbid. He's always very pessimistic because people cannot surprise him, and at times he can often get quite bored. But he always reads with eagerness and knows a being so intently that he cannot be tricked. He is straightforward and can be seemingly obtuse in his interest in others, but he shows great compassion for those he knows are not fully demonic, and he listens well to the opinions of others and their pleas, and values the trust placed in him by the Almighty. He has a great sense of duty, as without his presence and efforts the balance between heaven, hell, and the soul cycle would not be managed. Relations. Astaroth. His mother, and a being he does not despise or love. She never touched him and never talks to him, so he's quite grateful for this, and so they do not really have any relationship, other than whom he was born from. It is said his logical manner came from her. Thammuz, his father, one of the Watchers in the end, and a fallen angel. The former angel of the deep was rather more eager to embrace his son outside of heaven, and aid him in finding a place within creation. His deep, thoughtful manner is something that Mastema learnt, as well as the need to cover himself from the sight of man and risk their questioning. When Thammuz's lustful manner overcame him around the human women, Mastema aided in placing him in purgatory, but from time to time visits him, although his father always begs to know how long till his torment ends. Asmodeus, his half-brother and probably the only being in the universe that Mastema could claim to feel a distaste for. They seem the opposite sides of the same coin. Asmodeus was born within heaven and cast out to hell, whereas Mastema was born outside of hell and beckoned to work for heaven. Asmodeus is the symbol of the lust that created them. Asmodeus tries on many occasions to get his brother, at least in the first few years of their known existence, to test man's faith by leading them to him and letting him loose upon the world. But Mastema did not like the free-faced manner of his kin, and certainly Asmodeus was a driving force for him to stop being on the earth. Sataniel, or Satanel. The angel often mistaken for Lucifer and often described as having the same role as him. He is Mastema's mentor, and perhaps the only angel to understand his duality completely and give him acceptance and a role. When Mastema requires advice, he goes to the angel of true adversity that teaches how to overcome hardship through faith and they work well together. Samara, the Peri he fell for on earth. When Mastema used to test humans, he was met by a Peri trying to help them, and when he tested one human, she dissuaded the human from taking part and thwarted Mastema where he hadn't been thwarted before. The pair then seemed to see each other quite regularly, and Mastema found himself falling for her just as she felt for him. But upon reading through her book, he learnt that if he continued to love her, then her destiny would become uncertain and her happiness might not be fulfilled. Whereas the original draft stated she would find a human to fall in love with and become the first Peri to enter heaven, Mastema used this as his final reason not to test humans himself anymore, and later took charge of Samara's children to teach them how to work with him, while Samara was able to enter heaven once her human lover died, and they've never seen each other since. History. This gets a little complicated, so bear with me here. When Astaroth had her wings ripped off, her stomach was already swelling with the life within, and the moment she was knocked out of heaven and began to fall, she birthed a being that was full-grown and ugly yet beautiful, just like Asmodeus. This was Mastema. His wings opened out and he landed in front of the gates of heaven, but he was halted by Michael and the others who informed him that he could not enter heaven because he was not an angel created by the Almighty. When others with wings that were ugly angels like him gathered about behind him, seeking aid from the angels on purpose, Mastema calmed them and insisted they would find a task in time, and led them back to live amongst men. Whilst here they listened and watched the humans that developed, and then began to notice an angel with other angels behind him that would test the human faith. This was Satanel, and Mastema approached them. Fearful this being was like Lucifer and twisted, but Satan explained their role to Mastema, now that evil was loose in the world, and began to teach Mastema to do the same. The others following suit after their brother, but finding that unlike the angels, they could physically touch, be seen, and even harm these humans. They were cautious only to do something like make humans lose something important or trip over at first, something to make them humble for going against the Almighty. Although Satan could do much worse, and Mastema learnt from him how to summon demons. But unlike the angels, the demons did not mock and tease him, but were obedient to a being that could touch them too. Mastema then found himself being approached by the newly gained Mestral, with orders from the Almighty to not only aid Satan, but to judge the actions of humans before they entered heaven, to see if they should return to the soul cycle for another chance, be punished in purgatory, or should be sent straight to hell. Such an important power he shared with his fellows, and they strove to be as careful in their decision-making as was possible. Their first real chance came after the events of the Watchers, where the Mastemans insisted the actions of the human women and the men to seek answers were not reasons for total damnation, as they had listened to beings they believed benevolent. Their judgment saw these souls being returned to the cycle, along with several others, when the flood occurred and many humans perished. Mastema, though, also rescued some of the demonic creatures alongside Samael to help create the veil. Here, Mastema and his companions found themselves helping to dictate the ways the veil beings should be judged compared to others. Their needs, their natures, and their abilities would be taken into account, and Mastema was convinced that as long as they did nothing particularly heinous, then they would be permitted into the soul cycle at death and not to hell. But as he was given power by the Almighty, with each being that stepped to his fellows to give information, a book was created talking about the entire being's life and what they would do and how it affected them, and how they chose to do things. These books form the basis of how the veil would be judged, and indeed would be used later to prove the damage of beings like the demon dragons and some of the hybrids. They began to watch them when they entered the veil and made judgment and wrote up laws about the beings, at first never doing anything to interfere or prevent until they began to see that some of them needed to be warned to try and prevent them from creating a terrible future, making the books rewrite themselves. Mastema then requested help to give him and his companions a safe place to stay between heaven, hell, and earth, as his fellows began to pair with beings from the veil, and these more angelic beings and non-human were not as welcomed in the veil. So he was permitted to create a courtroom for the Mastema to live, and he gave them rules about when they could go to the earth, when they could breed, and various other rules to prevent lustful actions, or indeed anything to make them too biased. Then he would send them out when needed to advise beings against foolishness, whilst any soul that did not have a life that was clearly benevolent or malevolent would come into his courtroom, and lawyers against or for the beings' movement into heaven would give their case to Mastema, and he would decide their fate, with many going back into the soul cycle to try life again. Mastema's own visits to Earth began to reduce, but at times when he was requested by Satan to help him truly test kingdoms and countries, Mastema would bring out the demons needed without need to reward them, and would always obey the will of the Almighty on this matter. In this way he encountered his half-brother Asmodeus to encourage the lust of soldiers that were under the belief they were righteous, and encouraged them to rape or religious leaders to commit hideous sins ruled by lust. Mastema found it disgusting, but something humans really seemed to react to. Mastema became more and more frustrated as Asmodeus would beckon to be let loose in any situation, and with their contact and link, Mastema began to be cautious at the thought of being upon the earth, and then, one day, he gained a surprise. Whilst walking amongst humans, he sought out a human that was shown to have a dark side that could lead them down a terrible road of hurting others. Mastema appeared and watched the figure being bullied and frustrated. He then challenged him to fight back. If he decided to fight back, he would lose himself and kill, and never turn back. Mastema dared to test him, to encourage the bullying to be really bad, and just when the human was about to attack, a soft hand held his. A pretty female held him back and insisted that he would survive these injuries, that his strength was too much for them to handle. She told him that the Almighty would never place a burden on him that he could not handle, and the human understood, and being a Peri, followed after him and helped him. Mastema was shocked. He went to the Peri to ask about her, and how she had come to help the human at the right time, only to learn that she, Samara, had just arrived at the right time and assumed she'd spotted a Satan at work. He introduces himself and the pair make friends. From time to time he comes back to meet Samara, test her human, but usually to test her resolve to help the human. Though he meets rarely, Samara clearly enjoys his company, and from time to time they begin to hold hands and even lean their foreheads together. A love grows between them, and as Samara starts to look more eager to be with Mastema than focus on her human, Mastema feels concerned and speaks to Satan. He learns that because he is not an angel, he is permitted to love and breed just like his companions, but that he should look at what that would do for Samara's fate. It seemed Mastema was having his own test of faith, and needed to make a judgment on himself and his future with Samara. He learns from reading her book that her fate is rewriting because of certain decisions in life that will alter fate. The first reading says she will go to heaven along with her human, and be the first of the so-called weeping angels that enter into heaven, and be a greeter at the gates forever, a good future, and become all Peri's desire. However, the more he meets her, the more her future is altering away from this fate, and she will be unable to enter heaven, but always with him, yet unable to enter the Mastema court. She will have his children, and for 18 years he can stay away from his position to raise his children, laws he'd agreed to, but then he would not be able to see her regularly for centuries, and she might be alone. Mastema needed to choose what to do, and so he did. Mastema went to Samara and said that he was now going to remain in the court and never test man himself, but leave it to his followers. He informed her that his role was too important, and so was her role. She needed to think about the human and herself, and so Mastema never goes back to being around Samara again. It is a sad experience for him, but he revels in the experience, and he reads her future, and knows she will do what others have not, and she is grateful to have made a judgment on himself. But he never goes to Earth again, maintains his duty, but is always curious with the lives of others, and, though he knows who the dangerous are and who the heroes are, he knows it is unwise to interfere unless the balance is altered, and this, so far, he's always somehow had some way to prevent thanks to his followers. Final comments. I like Mastema. As you can see, he's a bit of an oddball, but has an important role for the beings of the Vale, and though his servants are mentioned more than himself in the stories, he's certainly an interestingly vague character when he appears, a bit like a librarian or custodian perhaps. Thank you for listening.